Snow was falling hard that night. Inside a small McDonald's on the edge of town, two 7-year-old twin girls, Lila and Maya, stood frozen in fear. Their tiny hands clutched each other, eyes wide, breaths shallow. From the restroom hallway, muffled voices whispered, sharp, threatening, wrong. Then came the sound of a stall door slamming. Seconds later, Lila stumbled out, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching her side as she gasped, "Mom, it hurts!" The restaurant fell silent. Two strange men leaned against the wall, their smirks cold and chilling. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Until, from outside, the deep bark of a German shepherd shattered the silence. A rugged PTSD soldier, haunted by his own nightmares, stepped into the chaos. And what he and his K9 were about to uncover was far darker than anyone dared to imagine. The wind howled through the narrow streets of a small Minnesota town, carrying fine needles of snow that stung bare cheeks and blurred the glow of street lamps. The night was bitter and endless, the kind of cold that seeped into bones and refused to let go. Storefronts were dark, sidewalks empty, and the only sound was the crunch of two pairs of tiny boots on hard-packed snow. Lila and Maya, 7-year-old twin sisters, walked side by side under the dim orange light of the street lamps. Though they were identical in many ways, the same delicate noses, soft pale skin, and chestnut hair, there was something in their eyes that set them apart. Lila, the older by 4 minutes, had a restless spark in her gaze, the kind of sharpness born from caution rather than curiosity. Her small hands were shoved deep into her oversized purple coat, and her lips pressed into a tight line as she scanned the street. Maya, slightly shorter, clung to her sister's mittened hand. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her brown hair tangled beneath a knitted gray beanie, and her wide hazel eyes carried a softness Lila often envied. Where Lila was skeptical, Maya trusted too easily. The girls had stayed late after school at the small community library. By the time they left, most of the town had gone quiet, the air heavy with drifting flakes. "Can we cut through here?" Maya whispered, pointing to a small shortcut that led past an old McDonald's at the corner. Lila hesitated, biting her lip. She didn't like shortcuts. Shortcuts meant fewer people, and fewer people meant fewer safe places to run. But Maya's pleading eyes won, like they always did. "Fine," she murmured, squeezing her sister's hand tighter, "but we stick together." The McDonald's stood hunched beneath a flickering neon sign, its golden arches glowing faintly behind a foggy window pane. Inside, the warmth smelled of fried oil, coffee, and something sweet left too long under heat lamps. It should have felt safe. But the moment the twins pushed through the door, Lila felt it. The wrongness. Something was off. At first glance, it was just another winter night. A toddler cried as his mother wiped sticky hands, an elderly couple shared a quiet meal by the window, and a young cashier called out an order number without much enthusiasm. Behind the counter, Olivia, 19, slim with messy blonde hair pulled into a loose bun, wore a faded McDonald's visor and a polite but distracted expression. There was a softness to her face, freckles across her nose, but exhaustion clung to her shoulders. She was juggling too many orders, her lavender nail polish chipped at the tips. In the corner booth, two men sat with untouched drinks. That was the first thing Lila noticed, the untouched drinks. The first man, later known only as Denim Jacket, looked to be in his mid-30s, with a narrow, angular face and sharp cheekbones shadowed by stubble. A crescent-shaped scar curved above his left eyebrow, pale against his tanned skin. His dirty blonde hair was buzzed unevenly, and his fingers drummed lightly against the tabletop, an impatient, erratic rhythm. His clothes smelled faintly of stale cigarettes. The second, ball cap, leaned back against the wall, one boot propped on the edge of the booth. He was taller, broader, but his movements were slower, more deliberate. The bill of his black cap shadowed his pale gray-blue eyes, which darted constantly, scanning the room like someone cataloging exits. His clean-shaven jaw looked rigid, tense. A faint citrus cologne hung around him, masking something heavier underneath. Sweat, maybe fear. They weren't eating. They weren't talking. They were just watching. "Lila," Maya tugged gently at her sleeve. "I want fries." "Okay," Lila said, her voice tighter than she intended. "But let's sit over there." She guided Maya to a booth near the back, right by the hallway leading to the restrooms. That was her mistake. The men moved when they did. Denim Jacket stood first, stretching lazily as if to disguise his purpose, and leaned against the wall by the hallway entrance. His lips curved into what should have been a friendly smile, but his eyes were cold and sharp. "Hey there," he said casually, voice smooth but off-key. "You two want some toys? They've got the special ones in the back. Super rare, only a few left." Ballcap joined him, stepping just close enough to block the other end of the hallway. He lowered his voice, conspiratorial, like sharing a secret. "Yeah," he murmured, "I can get you something they don't give everyone. Better come quick before they run out." Lila froze, her chest tightened. Her instinct screamed louder than the fryer hissing in the background. Her small body went rigid, pulling Maya closer until their shoulders touched. "No, thanks," she said softly, trying to make her voice sound calm. "We're waiting for our mom." Denim Jacket's smirk widened. "Perfect," he replied, leaning down so his face was level with hers. "She can meet you in the back." Maya's hand squeezed hers, trembling. She whispered so softly only Lila could hear. "Lila, I don't like them." "I know," Lila breathed, pulling her close. "Stay behind me." Olivia glanced up from the register, sensing something was wrong. But at that exact moment, a customer dropped a tray, and Mr. Benton, the manager, yelled for her to help. She hesitated, then looked away. The twins were alone. Ballcap moved first, his boot scraping against the tile as he stepped forward. "Come on," he said, his tone still smooth but quieter, sharper. "Just 2 minutes, that's all." He glanced toward the restroom door and back, a silent instruction to Denim Jacket. Lila's heart raced so violently she could feel it in her throat. Her breath came in shallow gasps. Her mom had warned her about strangers, about people who seemed too nice, but now she understood what that warning meant. This wasn't kindness. This was something darker. The hallway behind the men looked impossibly long, lit by a single buzzing fluorescent bulb that flickered unevenly. Lila's mind screamed to move, to run, but her legs locked beneath her. Denim Jacket reached a hand out, not touching, just hovering inches from her shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "You can trust us." Lila stepped back. "We said no," she whispered, her voice cracking despite her best effort. The man's smile faded. Something colder slid into his expression, a shadow passing behind his eyes. And then, a sound shattered the tension. A deep, sharp bark exploded from outside the McDonald's, reverberating against the glass windows. It wasn't the sound of a playful dog. It was protective, commanding. The kind that makes every muscle freeze instinctively. Heads turned, conversations stopped, and even Denim Jacket's smirk faltered. Through the falling snow outside, a tall figure approached the glass doors, accompanied by a large German shepherd. The dog's black and tan coat bristled, hackles raised. Amber eyes locked on the men by the hallway. Its breath fogged the air, ears pinned forward, ready to move. Beside him walked Jake Rourke, 45, tall and lean, shoulders squared beneath a worn army green field jacket dusted with snow. His once dark hair was streaked with gray, his sharp jawline shadowed by a day's stubble. His deep-set blue-gray eyes were piercing but weary, the kind of tired that came from seeing too much and sleeping too little. Jake was a retired soldier, medically discharged after an IED blast in Iraq left him with scars that didn't show on his skin. He suffered from PTSD, living in the quiet edges of town where noise was low and routine was safe. But he still walked at night. Rex, the German shepherd, always at his side. Tonight, those walks had brought him here. Jake's gaze swept the room. His hand brushed the worn leather collar at Rex's neck, steadying the dog as the barking subsided into a low, rumbling growl. He didn't speak, but his eyes locked with Denim Jacket's, sharp as a blade drawn slow from its sheath. Inside, Lila felt Maya's grip tighten, her breath ragged against her shoulder. Relief warred with terror in her chest. Someone had finally seen them. But the danger wasn't over yet. Jake stepped fully into the McDonald's, snow dripping from his jacket shoulders, the heavy boots beneath him silent against the greasy tile. The warmth inside clashed with the cold air he carried, filling the small restaurant with tension so thick it hummed. Rex, the 5-year-old German shepherd at his side, lowered into a guarded stance, hackles raised, amber eyes fixed on the two men near the hallway. His broad chest expanded with a low growl that vibrated through the floor, the kind of sound bred into generations of working dogs trained to protect. Lila clutched Maya's hands so tightly their knuckles blanched under the thin fabric of their mittens. Jake's gaze fell on them first. Two tiny girls in oversized coats, wide hazel eyes glassy with fear, pressed together in the booth as if trying to disappear into each other's shadow. He bent slightly, lowering his voice so it didn't add to the chaos they were already holding inside. "Hey," he murmured softly, glancing between them. "Are you two okay?" Neither spoke. Maya's chin trembled, and Lila's lips parted as if to answer, but no words came. Their silence screamed louder than anything they could have said. Jake straightened and turned toward the two men. Denim Jacket had shifted his weight against the wall, arms crossed now, his crescent-shaped scar catching the buzzing fluorescent light overhead. His jaw was clenched, but his expression was unnervingly casual, as though nothing here concerned him. Beside him, Ballcap leaned back slightly, one boot still hooked against the wall, pale gray-blue eyes narrowed, calculating. "Problem here?" Jake asked evenly, his tone measured, controlled, the kind of calm forged in deserts where chaos had teeth. The man in the denim jacket raised both hands slightly, a lazy gesture meant to signal innocence. "Nah, man," he said, his voice smooth, pitched somewhere between friendly and mocking. "Just being good Samaritans. Kids looked lost, so we offered to help." Ballcap's mouth twitched into a faint smile, though it didn't reach his cold, restless eyes. "Yeah," he added quietly. "Don't want anyone freezing out there, that's all." Jake didn't move. PTSD had rewired his senses into something sharp, relentless. He could hear too much, see too much, feel danger long before it became obvious. The weight of silence in the room, the stiff shoulders of the two men, the way the twins trembled without sound, none of it matched their story. His voice stayed calm, but his eyes hardened. "I think they'll be fine," he said, stepping slightly to the side so his body blocked the girls completely. Rex followed his lead, standing solid between Lila and the hallway, his powerful frame silent but brimming with intent. Olivia, the 19-year-old cashier, looked up again from behind the counter, her nervous gaze bouncing between Jake and the men. She bit her lip, torn between speaking and staying invisible. Her lavender nails tapped against the register before she ducked her head, pretending to clean a receipt roll. Jake crouched briefly, touching Maya's mittened hand. "It's okay now," he whispered. "I'm here." He reached carefully, scooping Maya into his arms without resistance, her tiny frame pressed into his chest like a frightened sparrow seeking cover from a storm. Lila hesitated but stepped closer instinctively, staying near Rex's flank, as though the dog's steady presence was safer than anything else in the room. Rex lowered his head briefly, sniffing her coat and letting out a soft huff, a signal of reassurance only a trained protector could give. Jake rose slowly, cradling Maya. "We're leaving," he said simply. Denim Jacket smirked, shrugging one shoulder in mock surrender. "Hey, whatever makes you happy, man." Ballcap shifted his stance slightly, rolling his shoulders like he wanted to say something more, but he stayed silent, letting Jake pass. Outside, the wind roared like an unbroken beast, whipping the snow sideways across the parking lot. Jake's truck sat idling beneath a halo of frost-streaked light, exhaust curling into the frozen air. He opened the back door, helping Lila climb in first before setting Maya gently beside her. Rex hopped into the front passenger seat with silent efficiency, body pressed against the door like a sentinel. Jake settled into the driver's seat, one hand gripping the steering wheel, the other resting lightly on the dashboard as he scanned the lot through the rearview mirror. The two men hadn't followed, but instinct told him this wasn't over. For a moment, there was only the hum of the truck's engine and the distant rattle of wind against the windows. Jake glanced back at the twins. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked softly, his voice careful, slow, the way you approach an injured animal, gentle but steady enough to guide them toward safety. Lila stared down at her lap, her mitten twisting nervously against itself. Maya leaned into her sister, silent tears streaking her flushed cheeks. Finally, Lila whispered, her voice breaking on the words. They said they'd take us." Jake's grip on the wheel tightened imperceptibly. "They told us. They'd find us if we didn't follow," she continued, her gaze flickering up at him briefly, wide and pleading, before dropping again. "They said Mom wouldn't even know." Jake's chest burned, his throat tightening around the quiet rage he had learned long ago to bury under control. He nodded slowly, forcing his voice to stay level. "I hear you," he said firmly. "You're safe now. They won't hurt you." But in his gut, he knew that promise wasn't a simple one to keep. As Jake eased the truck onto the quiet street, headlights carving thin paths through the swirling snow, his mind worked faster than his breathing. His military instincts screamed patterns. Two men, coordinated positions, language designed to lure and isolate. That wasn't chance. That was deliberate. He thought of Iraq, of markets that turned into traps, of split-second decisions where hesitation meant funerals. His knuckles whitened on the wheel. He could feel Rex tense beside him, the trained dog responding unconsciously to the spike in his heart rate, his soft whine cutting through the silence like a quiet warning. The McDonald's faded behind them, its neon sign a dim blur swallowed by the storm. But Jake knew better than to believe distance meant safety. 10 minutes later, as the truck rumbled toward the outskirts of town, Maya finally found her voice, small and fragile. Are we going home?" she asked, her words shaky, soft enough that Jake almost missed them over the rattle of the heater. Jake hesitated before answering. "We're going somewhere safe," he said carefully, "until we figure things out." Lila shifted uncomfortably, her mittened hands folded in her lap. Then, so faintly it was almost a secret, she whispered without looking at him. "Uncle Jake." She hesitated, her throat bobbing as she swallowed. "They said they'll find us." Her voice cracked on the last word, and the weight of it settled heavily inside the truck. Jake's jaw flexed. He glanced into the rearview mirror, checking the faint glow of headlights far behind them. Too steady, too close. He didn't say anything, but Rex's ears twitched, the dog shifting slightly to watch the rear window, as though sensing the storm outside was only half the danger waiting for them. The storm had worsened by the time Jake's truck rolled into the narrow driveway beside his small, weathered cabin on the outskirts of town. The headlights cut through a haze of falling snow, revealing a modest single-story home tucked beneath bare, wind-bent pines. The roof carried a heavy blanket of white, and the windows glowed faintly with the soft amber light of a single lamp left on inside. Rex jumped down from the truck first, his black and tan coat dusted with snowflakes, body taut and alert. His sharp amber eyes scanned the yard, as though expecting movement, muscles twitching beneath his thick winter coat. The German Shepherd's senses were finely tuned, trained for threat detection, and Jake trusted Rex's instincts more than his own fractured ones. He unbuckled Lila and Maya, helping them down carefully. The twins clung to his jacket sleeves, small figures swallowed by their oversized coats, their boots crunching against the icy driveway. Inside, the warmth wrapped around them instantly, a sharp contrast to the punishing wind outside. Jake's cabin wasn't much. Faded wooden walls lined with framed photographs of his old platoon, a worn leather couch near the fireplace, and shelves crowded with books stacked too deep. The faint smell of cedarwood clung to the air, mixed with the distant hum of the heater. "Sit down," Jake said gently, motioning toward the couch as he hung his snow-soaked jacket on a hook near the door. "I'll make you something warm." The twins climbed onto the couch together, Maya curling against Lila's shoulder, shivering as though the cold had sunk deeper than skin. Jake moved into the small kitchen, putting a kettle on the stove. Steam hissed as he poured hot water into 2 chipped mugs, dropping in tea bags of chamomile, hoping it would settle their shaking. He returned to the living room and set the mugs on the coffee table. "Drink slow," he said softly, kneeling in front of them so his gaze was level with theirs. "You're safe here." Lila hesitated before taking a sip, her tiny hands shaking slightly as she wrapped them around the warm mug. Maya followed her lead, but as she set her mug down, the strap of her small red backpack slid off her shoulder. It tumbled to the rug with a soft thud, the zipper half opened. Jake bent instinctively to pick it up. That's when he saw it. Inside, nestled between a folded scarf and a tiny notebook covered in colorful stickers, sat a slim, unfamiliar black smartphone, its surface scratched but functional. Jake froze, his brows knitting together. "Is this yours?" he asked quietly, holding up the phone. Maya shook her head quickly, her hazel eyes widening. No, she stammered, glancing at Lila. I found it in the parking lot earlier. I thought maybe Mom dropped it." Jake's jaw tightened as he powered the device on. It didn't require a password. As the screen lit up, a single app appeared on the home page. No games, no photos, just a tracking interface with a live GPS feed pulsing faintly in the center. Jake's chest tightened. He zoomed in on the map and saw it. A glowing red dot marking their exact location. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. Lila leaned forward, her small voice trembling. What does it mean?" Jake closed the app immediately and switched the phone into airplane mode, forcing his voice steady. "It means," he said slowly, "whoever put this here knows where we are." Rex, who had been pacing near the doorway, suddenly stiffened. His ears perked, and a deep, low growl rumbled from his chest. He padded toward the front window, pressing his nose against the glass before letting out a sharp, warning bark. Jake was on his feet in an instant, moving toward the window, his heart pounding. Outside, the storm howled, whipping snow sideways under the porch light. At first, he saw nothing, just darkness, snow, and the skeletal shadows of trees. But Rex growled again, louder this time, hackles bristling along his spine. Something, or someone, was out there. Jake checked the locks on the front and back doors, his mind running through contingency plans. Years of military training flooded back in an instant. Isolate the threat, secure the perimeter, protect the civilians. But the pounding in his chest reminded him he wasn't on a battlefield anymore. He glanced at the twins, huddled together on the couch, their mugs abandoned, Lila gripping Maya's hand so tightly her knuckles had turned white. They didn't need to see his fear. He grabbed the landline from the kitchen counter and dialed 911. A calm, steady female voice answered on the first ring. "North County Dispatch, what's your emergency?" "This is Jake Rourke," he said, his tone clipped but steady. "I've got 2 kids here. Possible abduction attempt earlier tonight at the McDonald's off Birchwood Drive. Found a tracker hidden in their belongings. I think we're being followed." There was a pause, followed by the dispatcher's voice sharpening. "We'll send units immediately, Mr. Rourke, but roads are partially closed. Blizzard conditions, fastest ETA is 35 minutes. Can you secure the property until then?" Jake's jaw clenched. "I'll manage." The line clicked dead, leaving only the hiss of the wind outside and the rhythmic tick of the wall clock filling the silence. He crouched in front of the twins again, forcing a calm expression into his face, even as adrenaline burned beneath his skin. "Listen to me," he said quietly, holding their gazes one at a time. "I need you to stay right here, together, no matter what happens. Don't open the doors. Don't go near the windows. Understand?" Maya nodded quickly, tears clinging to her lashes. Lila, though visibly shaken, managed a small, determined nod. From the window, Rex gave another sharp bark, deeper and angrier this time. His tail was stiff, his body tense, his breath fogging the glass with each huff. Jake moved to the gun cabinet by the hallway, unlocking it and pulling out a standard-issue Sig Sauer P226, the same sidearm he'd carried overseas. He checked the chamber, slid a full magazine into place, and holstered it at his side. The room was silent except for the faint sound of the kettle whistling again. Then, from outside, headlights cut briefly through the swirling snow. Jake dropped low beneath the window, peering carefully through the curtain's edge. A dark SUV had slowed on the road, stopping just beyond his driveway. Its engine idled, exhaust spilling white plumes into the storm. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the SUV rolled forward, disappearing into the whiteout. Jake's instinct screamed this wasn't over. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he reached Sheriff Laura Daniels, a longtime friend from his time working private security after the military. Laura was in her late 30s, tall and athletic, with sharp cheekbones, warm brown eyes, and a quick, dry wit that had gotten her through 2 divorces and a decade of keeping a small town safe. She answered on the second ring, her voice low but steady. "Jake, what's going on?" "Found a tracker on the kids," he said bluntly. "Got eyes on a dark SUV circling the road. Dispatch says backup's 35 out." There was a beat of silence, then Laura cursed softly under her breath. "Lock everything down. I'll try to get to you myself if the roads allow." "Appreciate it," Jake said, cutting the line short before she could argue. Rex trotted back to his side, pressing against his leg with a low whine, half warning, half reassurance. Jake crouched, scratching behind the dog's ears, grounding himself in the present. "Good boy," he murmured, We've got this." He returned to the living room, checking on the twins again. Lila looked up at him, her voice tiny but steady this time. "Uncle Jake, are they coming?" He hesitated, then knelt so his eyes were level with hers. "Not if Rex and I have anything to say about it." But deep down, he knew the storm outside was only hiding their hunters. Night pressed close to the cabin, a black lung full of wind. Snow hissed across the porch boards, and the trees bowed and rattled like old bones. Inside, the heater hummed, the kettle clicked, and the clock kept the sort of careful time people count when they're waiting for help. Rex found it first, a scent that didn't belong to pine, smoke, or thawing wool. His head snapped up from the rug, ears knifed forward, body long and still. Then a low growl rose from his chest, as if a door had opened on something he hated. He trotted to the back hall and planted himself beneath the narrow window that looked toward the rear stoop. The growl hardened, the way metal hardens when it's cooled in snow. Jake crossed the room in 3 quiet strides and lifted the tablet that controlled his old battery cams. Years of living alone on the edge of town had taught him to put eyes where men like to hide. He thumbed through the feeds, front eave, driveway pine, back stoop, and the back camera bloomed to life. 2 figures ghosting through the storm, heads down, shoulders hunched, moving with the careful economy of men who don't want to be heard. Denim jacket, ball cap. The same smirks now pared down to their bones. Jake's breath shortened in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He pulled the living room light low, then knelt by the couch. Lila and Maya watched him, both sitting cross-legged, ankles touching like tethered balloons. Lila's eyes were dry and too bright. Maya's lashes were stuck together from tears and the wet of snow. He kept his voice under the wind. "Listen, we stay quiet. You do not open the doors. If I say hide, go to the pantry and lock it from the inside. Stay with Rex if I send him." He touched their gloved hands, a brief squeeze that didn't pretend the world was soft. "You're not alone." The Sig Sauer was a weight he knew. He checked it reflexively and settled it at his hip. The motions were muscle memory, but he felt the tremor in his forearm, a familiar static that came when the past tried to superimpose itself over the present. Hallways changing, lights stuttering, time folding like paper. He focused his eyes until the tablet screen snapped into clarity again. The men were at the rear steps now, one boot testing the bottom stair. Rex huffed once, clipped and ready. A whisper drifted from the couch, thin as thread. "Uncle Jake?" Lila's voice. A name she'd given him because calling him Mister felt like another kind of distance. "If they're here, will they—" "No," he said, aloud and inside himself at once. "Not tonight." He left the girls the flashlight and moved down the hallway. The back vestibule was narrow and smelled of wet wood. Through the glass pane, snow painted the world white and closer than it was. Jake took a breath, measured, set his shoulders. He unlocked the deadbolt silently, then relocked it, buying time in inches. He needed to control the moment they would take anyway. The handle jostled, a pause, another, the polite knock of predators. "Anyone home?" A voice bright with counterfeit courtesy. Denim jacket. Jake flashed back to Iraq. Market canvas, generator buzz, the way a boy had said, "Mister, please," just before a van door rolled. The memory tried to bite. He let it pass like a wave going through him, not into him. "Wrong house," Jake said, even in quiet through the door. "Funny," Ballcap chuckled. "We just want to ask the kids something. They forgot their prize." Rex's growl rolled into a bark that shook dust from the trim. "Back off," Jake said. "Sheriff's on the way." "Roads are slow tonight," Denim Jacket cooed. "We'll be quick." The rear latch scratched, metal on metal, a tool searching a mouth for soft gum. Jake slid his feet wider and lifted the deadbolt. The door swung inward a hand's breadth, caught by the chain latch. A gloved hand reached for the chain. Jake moved first. He slammed the door outward, caught the reaching arm between door and jamb, and drove it closed to a howl. The chain held. He reversed the motion, door in, chain off, door out, and stepped through into the storm with the kind of speed that lives in old training and debt to the living. Ballcap lunged low, shoulder first, but Jake pivoted, shoved his palm under the man's jaw, and redirected him into the rail. The rail sang, the man spilled to the steps, breath blasting in a grunt. Denim Jacket came in fast and dirty. He tried to hook Jake's front leg with his boot while his left hand went toward Jake's hip. Jake broke the grip at the wrist, rotated, felt fingers skim the holster, and slapped the hand away, then drove an elbow into soft ribs. The wind did the rest, dropping the man to one knee, face snow-dusted, eyes bright with a mean sort of delight. Inside, the living room door burst open. Rex hit the night like a launched weapon, head low, body elastic, paws digging, a black and tan streak that lived to break straight lines. He went for the nearest wrist. The bite landed with a sound that was not a sound, a kind of wet crunch under a scream. Denim jacket fell sideways into the snow, his glove chewed red, and the hand that wore it suddenly, painfully real. Rex held but didn't shake. He pinned and waited, eyes cutting to Jake for the next line in the sentence. Out! Jake snapped to the dog, meaning distance, meaning guard. Rex released instantly and moved 2 steps back. Weight centered, lips peeled just enough to make the message bright. Ballcap came up again, lower now, and pulled a knife from his jacket, short, fixed blade, the sort you hide in a glove box and pretend you never saw. He slashed reflexively, a panic arc more dangerous for its stupidity. Jake's body chose before his mind did. He pivoted outside the blade, grabbed the wrist with his left hand, and stamped hard at the man's ankle. The boot slid on ice, the knee collapsed, the knife skittered into snow like a silver fish. Jake twisted the wrist and pushed the face into the steps. The breath left Ballcap in a wheeze. Don't, Jake said, to the night, to the past, to the man beneath his palm. A siren murmured somewhere far off, swallowed by the wind and pushed back as if the storm didn't want help here. Lights from the road flashed faint, then went. 35 minutes had become 40. Rex kept a half-moon orbit, cutting any line of approach, breathing in tight bursts that steamed like a small engine. Lila and Maya watched from the hallway, faces pale ovals, hands clasped under their chins. Lila trembled and didn't know it. Maya seemed not to breathe at all. Pick up the knife, Denim Jacket hissed through a mess of snow and spit, eyes darting to the blade half buried near the bottom step. Rex answered for Jake. 2 barks, precise, the sort that say, do not. The dog planted a paw directly on the knife, a bizarrely human gesture that made Denim Jacket laugh once, sharp with pain. You don't understand how big this is, he panted, smile peeling back over his teeth, now that he could talk again. You think this is about 2 little girls and a toy phone? You're a speed bump. Jake pressed Ballcap's wrist harder until the man stopped testing him. Breathe, Jake said to himself, counting silently through the storm's roll. He looked over his shoulder toward the girls. Back, he told them, and pointed. Lila nodded as if he'd handed her a mission. She took Maya's hand and pulled her deeper into the house, into light. The pantry door thudded shut like a small, sane heartbeat. The SUV eased back onto the road. Jake hadn't seen it return, which meant it had been there for minutes, all white and quiet and patient. He caught its shadow as it rolled behind the pines, then the soft wash of its headlights slid across the cabin wall, like a thought. He imagined a driver, someone older, someone who didn't get out of cars, someone who didn't like snow on shoes. A voice on a headset. A ledger. The shape of organized harm. Sirens bloomed again from the east, closer now, urgent enough to cut the wind. In the glow that followed, Sheriff Laura Daniels appeared first, tall in a storm parka, the color of warning tape, brown eyes narrowed against the snow, jaw set in the way of someone who held a line for a living. She was flanked by a younger deputy, Eric Mora, mid-20s, clean-shaven, with dark corkscrew hair pressed flat by his hat, and a steady, quiet competence that read as the best kind of new. He moved like a man who measured before he lifted. The snow took their boots and gave them back. Hands where I can see them, Laura called, voice even. Ballcap complied, face in the steps, hands cuffed behind him by Eric in one clean motion. Denim Jacket tried for a smirk that took too much of his face to be convincing. Laura answered it with a knee in the snow, a hand at his shoulder, and a zip tie that cinched a little tighter than his charm. You okay? Laura asked Jake without taking her eyes off the men. Girls inside, he said. Rex has the knife. Laura almost smiled at the dog's planted paw, then didn't. Good boy, she said anyway, because some words were earned. As Eric hauled Ballcap upright, the man found his breath for swagger. Lawyer, he croaked. You can't. You'll get one. Laura said. "You'll also get photographed, printed, and inventoried, starting with that hand. Does it still work?" Her tone was not unkind and not negotiable. Denim Jacket leaned toward Jake as he was pulled to his feet, voice oily soft. "She's not safe, you know," he murmured. "The mother." Laura's head snapped a fraction. Jake's shoulders stopped moving. "What did you say?" Denim Jacket laughed, winced, and laughed again, because he liked how it hurt other people more than him. "You heard me. Your twins don't walk home alone because the world's fair. You think you're a savior? You showed up late." Eric glanced at Laura, who gave the tiniest shake of her head. "Not here. Not yet." The deputy guided the man toward the cruiser. Rex paced the length of the porch once, twice, a metronome set to tension. Jake looked back toward the hallway, where two small faces hovered at the edge of light. "Sarah," Lila said when the door cracked open. Barely a name, barely a sound. "Who's Sarah?" Laura asked gently. "Our mom," Lila answered, as if she had to use the word carefully or it would break. "She was supposed to meet us after the library, but she works nights at the care home now. Sometimes she's late." She blinked hard, then added as if it cost her, "Our dad can't come. He died. In Afghanistan." Jake felt the floor tilt in his chest and right itself again. He saw Sarah in the space Lila's voice made, a tired woman in her early 30s with tired hands, a too-thin winter coat, brown hair pulled back so it wouldn't fall into soup or bleach, eyes that watched clocks because the rent asked for punctuality. He imagined a badge with her first name and a schedule that didn't ask permission to take people's evenings. He imagined late-night texts that offered cash for surveys that weren't surveys. He tasted bile. Laura's gaze softened, then sharpened again. "We'll find her," she said. "Tonight." Denim Jacket called from the cruiser window, voice sing-song with a split lip. "Bigger than you think, Sheriff." Snow swallowed him as the door shut. The wind rose. The sirens dimmed. Inside the small cabin, heat pushed back the cold by inches, and the kettle clicked off again, as if nothing had happened. Jake reached for the pantry door. Two girls fell into his arms, small and solid and real. He looked at Laura over their heads, and in his eyes was the thing he'd been denying since the McDonald's hallway. This wasn't random. It was a net, and it had snared more than one family. He stroked Rex's neck, feeling the dog's heart thudding under his hand. "We're not done," he said to the sheriff, to the storm, to the thing behind the men's grins. Rex answered with a single low bark, the kind that meant ready. The cabin smelled of melting snow and cooling adrenaline. Outside, the cruiser headlights were still carving pale tunnels through the blizzard, and inside, Jake stood in the quiet wreckage of breath and heartbeat, hands braced against the kitchen counter. Rex paced by the front door, his ears twitching at each groan of wind through the trees, amber eyes tracking movements Jake couldn't see. Sheriff Laura Daniels stood near the table, leaning on one hip, her parka still zipped up, snowflakes clinging to her dark hair. Her brown eyes held the hard, steady patience of someone who'd balanced too many crises on too little sleep. Deputy Eric Mora moved between the restrained men and his notepad, methodical and silent. He was young, clean-shaven, with short curls pressed flat under his hat, and a precision in his movements that came from wanting to do things right the first time. The two suspects sat cuffed at opposite ends of the bench by the door. Denim Jacket nursed his bitten wrist, still damp with melted snow, where Rex had torn through the glove. Ball cap slouched lower, his lips swollen, pale eyes narrowed to restless slits. Even injured, both men radiated defiance, as if the game was still theirs to win. Laura crossed her arms, breaking the silence. "Names, now." Denim Jacket's smirk faltered just enough to be noticeable. "You got a warrant?" Laura stepped forward, her shadow cutting across him. "I've got 2 minors under your attempted custody, a knife from your friend's jacket, and a tracker device linked to this house. You want me to ask twice?" Ballcap cracked a laugh, short and sharp. "You really don't get it," he rasped, voice low and gravelly, like it had been burned raw by cigarettes. "We don't answer to small-town cops. You're scratching the paint on something bigger than you can drive." Jake crouched in front of the red backpack, pulling out the slim black phone he'd found earlier. The twins were still curled on the couch behind him, huddled under one of his old wool blankets, silent but wide-eyed. He powered the device back on, thumb scrolling through its files as the faint blue light spilled across his scarred knuckles. One folder, locked. He tapped twice, entered the default code most traffickers used, 9110, and the file opened. A sick map unfolded across the screen. Red pins marked multiple states: Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, stretching east to Ohio. Beneath each pin were profile images of children, notes in coded shorthand, meeting locations, timestamps. Some pictures had green check marks, others were circled in yellow. His breath slowed, almost stopped, as the pieces arranged themselves into a truth that burned colder than the blizzard outside. "This isn't random," Jake muttered. "They're running a network." Laura leaned over his shoulder, scanning the data, her face hardening with each new screen. Jesus! She looked back at the suspects. How deep does this go? Denim Jacket met her gaze with a grin missing 2 teeth. "Deeper than your badge." Jake straightened slowly, jaw tight, voice low enough to rumble in his chest. "This network? How do they pick the kids?" Ballcap finally lifted his head. "Places where they won't be missed right away," he said, tone almost casual, as if explaining the weather. "Fast food joints, arcades, malls. Kids come in, we offer prizes, games. Nobody asks questions." Lila flinched on the couch. Maya tucked herself tighter beneath the blanket, her small hand gripping her sister's. Jake's fist clenched, but Rex beat him to the reaction. One sharp, guttural bark that rattled the quiet walls. Denim Jacket shifted uncomfortably this time, the smile cracking around the edges. Laura pulled her phone from her pocket, dialing dispatch. "We need the FBI cybercrime unit," she said flatly. "Now. Send encrypted images from device ID ending in 7702 to Special Agent Mason's secure line." She ended the call and turned back to Jake. "You okay?" Jake's hand hovered on Rex's fur, grounding himself in the warmth there, but his gaze had gone far past the room, past the storm, back to another heat entirely. Iraq. The air had smelled like copper and diesel. In a cramped side street outside Tikrit, his squad had tracked chatter about a smuggling ring using aid trucks to move civilians. One of those trucks was supposed to carry children. They'd intercepted it, but too late. A small girl with tangled black hair and almond eyes, no older than Maya, lay curled against the side paneling, already gone. Her name was Yasmin. Jake had carried her out under a sweltering sky, and no amount of water had washed the grit from his hands that day. Her face had followed him home and built a nest inside his dreams, waking him gasping, drenched in the weight of what he couldn't undo. His breathing quickened, vision tunneling as old echoes folded into now, the twins' pale faces, the tracker map, the SUV waiting somewhere unseen. "Jake!" Laura's voice cut through the spiral. Her hand on his forearm was firm but steady. "Stay with me." He blinked hard, drew in a ragged breath, and anchored himself on Rex's warm flank. The dog whined softly, leaning into him, steady as stone. This time, he promised himself silently, no more Yasmins. Laura paced near the window, scanning the tree line. "I'll call in a protective detail for the girls. We'll move them somewhere safe until this shakes loose." "No," Jake said sharply, then steadied his tone. "If we move them now, we expose them on the road. Whoever's behind this knows the cabin already. Better we fortify here until we find where the trail leads." Eric, who'd been silently entering the phone's metadata into his laptop, looked up. "The GPS tracker's pinging from multiple relay points," he explained, voice quiet but precise. "Whoever's managing this is masking their location, but the pings originate out of Chicago. Could be a hub." Laura's mouth tightened. "Great. That's 2 states of jurisdictional nightmares." Jake tapped the screen again, enlarging one of the contact chains. "This number," he said, pointing to a long string of texts marked with timestamps. "Same sender for multiple profiles. Whoever owns this phone is coordinating the pickups." Laura's eyes narrowed. "And we're holding his middlemen." Denim Jacket leaned his head against the wall, smirking even through the swelling around his jaw. "You think those kids are still in Chicago? You're already behind." Jake stepped forward, lowering his voice. "Then help us catch up." For the first time, Denim Jacket's grin faltered. He looked away, jaw flexing. The silence stretched until Rex padded forward 2 deliberate steps, standing inches from his boots. Finally, the man swallowed and muttered, "Ask Marcus. We just run collections." "Marcus who?" Laura demanded. The man shook his head. "Doesn't matter. You won't touch him. Chicago PD tried last year." "And?" Jake pressed. They lost 3 officers. Laura rubbed her temple and exhaled. All right, we get this up the ladder fast. She signaled Eric, who started securing the phone for transfer and encrypting a duplicate for evidence. Jake sank into the chair by the table, his body heavy, but his mind wired sharp. He stared at the red pins on the map again, forcing his thoughts to stay present. Yasmin's ghost was loud, but tonight he had 2 living girls breathing in his house, and that changed the math entirely. I'm not letting them disappear, he said quietly, more to himself than anyone else. Laura met his eyes. Then we don't let them. The blizzard raged on, rattling the cabin windows and throwing ice needles against the roof. But inside, the work had begun. Eric packed up the encrypted drives, Laura coordinated with state troopers, and Jake took Rex to sweep the perimeter one last time. The storm carved tracks of white beneath the pines, but no new footprints broke the drifts. Back inside, Jake checked the locks, closed the curtains, and returned to where Lila and Maya had finally fallen asleep curled together on the couch. He brushed a loose strand of Maya's hair from her face, his hand pausing on the tiny rise and fall of her breathing. His chest ached, but not from memory, from resolve. This time, he thought, no one slips through. The storm finally began to thin by the next morning, though the air was still heavy with the cold bite of lingering frost. Snowdrifts had piled waist-high against the cabin walls, and the pine branches bent low, dripping icy beads onto the ground below. Inside, the warmth from the small fireplace radiated softly, wrapping the room in an illusion of safety. But Jake knew better. Safety was fragile, especially now. Sheriff Laura Daniels arrived just after sunrise, her parka dusted white, boots crunching through the frozen crust, as Rex barked a short greeting from the porch. Behind her trailed Deputy Eric Mora, carrying 2 folders thick with reports. He shook the snow from his hat as he stepped inside, his usually steady composure strained by the contents of those papers. Laura wasted no time. "We've been digging," she said, unzipping her parka and spreading a map across Jake's table. "This isn't just Chicago. This whole area has been flagged multiple times. McDonald's off Birchwood Drive has been on the radar before. Complaints of strange men hanging around, approaching kids. The store's management ignored the warnings." Jake's jaw tightened. He pictured Lila and Maya sitting in that booth, feet barely touching the floor, and the thought of how close they had come to disappearing entirely sent a cold weight through his chest. Eric added quietly, "We pulled security logs. Someone had disabled half the cameras inside last week. Whoever's behind this, they were counting on blind spots." Before Jake could respond, Laura continued, flipping open another folder. "We've got a new witness. Works at a convenience store next to the McDonald's. She reached out last night after seeing the news." The front door creaked open, and Reina Chavez stepped inside, hugging a scarf tightly around her neck. She was in her early 20s, petite but wiry, with warm brown skin, dark curly hair tied back under a beanie, and sharp, restless eyes that constantly scanned the room. Her voice carried the tremor of someone who had been holding a truth too long. "I saw them," Reina said, rubbing her hands nervously. "Not just those 2 men you caught. There were others. I worked the late shift at the Quick Mart across the street. We all know the regulars, but these guys, they weren't regulars. They came in, bought nothing, just, watched." Laura nodded, her tone careful. "What exactly did you see, Reina?" Reina hesitated, glancing briefly at the twins curled up on the couch under their shared blanket. She lowered her voice. "About 3 weeks ago, I saw 2 little girls leave the McDonald's with a man in a gray hoodie. I thought maybe he was their dad, but..." She swallowed hard. "They didn't come back. I checked with the employees the next day, and nobody remembered seeing them leave with an adult." Silence settled heavily over the room. Even the wind outside seemed to pause. Jake leaned forward, his voice low, steady. "And you didn't report it?" Her shoulders hunched as though bracing for the judgment. "I tried," she whispered. "Called the non-emergency line. The officer I spoke with said there wasn't enough evidence. Said I was probably mistaken." Eric exhaled sharply through his nose, shaking his head. "Jesus." Laura placed a hand on Reina's arm. "You did the right thing by coming here now. We'll fix this." An hour later, the team mobilized. Using the phone Jake recovered, Reina's testimony, and surveillance feeds from nearby businesses, they tracked one of the last known signals from the GPS app. It led them to an abandoned property on the edge of town, a faded two-story house with boarded windows, half buried beneath snowdrifts and neglect. Jake drove the lead truck, Rex sitting tall in the passenger seat, alert and ready, his thick black and tan fur bristling beneath the soft light breaking through the clouds. Lila and Maya stayed behind at the cabin, under the care of another deputy, their small hands clinging to each other until the truck disappeared around the bend. When the convoy arrived, Laura signaled for silence as her boots crunched over the frozen path. Eric scanned the perimeter, his young face tense, his gloved fingers resting lightly on the grip of his sidearm. The front door was chained from the outside, a detail that made Jake's gut clench. Laura signaled the team, and within seconds, the lock was cut, the hinges groaned, and the door gave way. The air inside was stale, smelling faintly of mold and fear. And then came the sound. A soft whimper, high-pitched, muffled. Rex moved first, nose low, tail stiff, tracing the sound through the dusty hallway until he stopped at a closed door beneath the staircase. His paw scraped against the frame, claws clicking once, twice, urgent. Eric knelt, ear against the wood. "Voices," he whispered. Laura positioned her team. On her count, the door burst open. Inside the cramped, dimly lit room were 4 little girls, no older than 9, huddled beneath thin blankets on a mattress dragged into the corner. Their cheeks were streaked with tears, their bare feet pressed together for warmth. One clutched a broken doll, another hid her face in her knees. Jake's throat tightened as he crouched low, his voice soft and careful, the same way he had spoken to Lila and Maya the night before. "You're safe now," he whispered. "We're here." Rex stepped closer, lowering his head, and one of the girls hesitated before reaching out with trembling fingers to touch the thick fur behind his ears. The dog stayed still, letting her lean into him, her tiny sobs muffled against his neck. Raina stood frozen in the doorway, tears streaming silently as relief and guilt twisted together in her chest. Laura placed a hand on her shoulder gently. "You helped save them," she said firmly. "Don't ever forget that." Outside, the little girls were wrapped in warm blankets from the sheriff's truck, their cheeks pink against the cold. Jake stood back with Rex, watching as they were lifted into safety one by one. He felt something loosen in his chest he hadn't realized was locked tight, a mix of grief and gratitude that burned behind his ribs. Lila and Maya would have been here, but they weren't, because someone fought back. The courthouse stood tall against the pale winter sky, its sandstone walls rimed with frost, the flag above snapping sharply in the icy wind. Breath turned to mist as people gathered outside, bundled in heavy coats, boots crunching on the salted steps. It was the day everyone had been waiting for, a day to end one chapter of fear and begin another of healing. Inside the packed courtroom, muted whispers filled the space. The benches were lined with residents from across town, parents holding their children a little closer than usual, their faces pale but resolute. A thin beam of morning light filtered through tall windows, catching motes of dust suspended in the cold air. Jake sat near the front beside Sheriff Laura Daniels and Deputy Eric Mora. His posture was rigid, his scarred hands folded on his lap, Rex sitting loyally at his side. The German shepherd's black and tan coat gleamed under the soft light, his amber eyes sweeping the room with quiet alertness. Every so often, his ears flicked toward the heavy wooden doors, as if he, too, understood the weight of this day. In the row behind Jake sat Sarah Coleman, the mother of Lila and Maya. She was 32, tall but slender, with soft brown hair pulled into a low ponytail and pale skin that seemed even lighter beneath the courtroom lights. Deep shadows under her hazel eyes hinted at too many sleepless nights, and her thin hands rested tightly around a small chain bracelet, a nervous habit she had never broken. Once a nursing assistant, Sarah now carried the haunted posture of someone who had walked too close to losing everything, but still fought to hold on for her children. Lila and Maya weren't there. Laura had insisted they be spared from reliving it. They were safe at home with a social worker, sketching pictures of Rex and the cabin instead of facing their nightmares again. Judge Richard Thompson entered, a tall, broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with neatly combed silver hair and a lined face shaped by decades of weighing impossible choices. He wore his authority without effort, his calm presence quieting the room without a single word. When he took his seat, silence settled like fresh snow. The trial had lasted 3 days. The evidence had been overwhelming. GPS data from the phone Jake had recovered, surveillance from surrounding businesses, Reina Chavez's emotional testimony, and encrypted files sent to federal investigators. Now, it came down to the verdict. The two men, denim jacket and ball cap, sat at the defense table, wrists cuffed, eyes hollow, yet still defiant. Denim jacket's injured hand was heavily bandaged, the wound from Rex's bite healing poorly. Ball cap sat slouched, his pale blue eyes darting between the floor and the ceiling, as though searching for an escape that didn't exist. The jury forewoman, a middle-aged woman with soft features and neatly pinned blonde hair, rose slowly, a slip of paper trembling faintly in her hand. On the counts of child endangerment, unlawful restraint, conspiracy to traffic minors, and attempted abduction, she paused, inhaling deeply before continuing. We, the jury, find the defendants guilty on all charges. The courtroom erupted. Gasps, soft cries, the sharp clatter of someone's pen hitting the floor. Sarah exhaled shakily, her hands trembling as she covered her face, tears slipping silently through her fingers. Jake lowered his head for a moment, a breath caught deep in his chest, before his hand found Rex's collar. Judge Thompson nodded gravely, turning his attention to the defendants. Given the severity of these crimes, the trauma inflicted, and the scale of this network, this court sentences you to 25 years in federal prison with no possibility of parole for the first 15. The two men didn't flinch, though Ballcap's jaw worked furiously as if grinding down invisible words. Denim Jacket gave a bitter laugh, but even his bravado felt empty now. Later that afternoon, federal agents released a statement. Marcus, the elusive coordinator who had orchestrated the trafficking ring from Chicago, had been captured along with several other operatives. It had taken combined efforts between state police, the FBI, and Jake's recovered data. But the network had collapsed. Outside the courthouse, the bitter wind carried something lighter: relief. Reporters clustered on the steps, microphones raised, but Jake avoided them entirely, pulling his collar high and focusing on the voice that mattered most. You kept them safe, Laura said softly, as she joined him, the pale sunlight flashing against her badge. Her brown eyes, usually sharp, had softened with rare pride. Jake glanced at her, his expression measured but grateful. We kept them safe, he corrected. Then his gaze drifted to Sarah, who stood near the bottom of the steps, tears streaking her cheeks, but her chin lifted high. She gave Jake a small nod, silent but heavy with meaning. Weeks later, the community gathered again, but this time there was no fear, only gratitude. The town square was decorated with winter garlands, snow shoveled away to make room for a small wooden stage where a banner hung, honoring our heroes, Lila and Maya's light. Dozens of families stood bundled together, clapping softly as Sheriff Laura took the podium. Behind her stood Jake, his broad shoulders wrapped in a dark coat, his scars visible now without apology, and Rex at his heel, tail swishing faintly. Some stories, Laura began, her voice carrying gently over the crowd. Don't end in shadows. Some end in light, because someone chooses to stand when others can't. She turned toward Jake, her warm brown eyes steady despite the cold. On behalf of this town, and the families whose lives will never be the same, we honor you and Rex for your bravery, your resolve, and your refusal to let fear win. She held up 2 small velvet boxes. Inside each lay a silver medal etched with the town seal, a paw print intertwined with a shield. The applause rose as Jake knelt slightly so Rex could receive his medal first, the German shepherd tilting his head as Laura slipped it gently around his neck. Then she pinned Jake's own, her hand resting briefly on his shoulder as the crowd stood in silence before breaking into cheers. From the front row, Lila and Maya ran forward, throwing their small arms around Rex's neck. The dog licked their cheeks eagerly, his tail thumping against Jake's boots. The girls' laughter broke into soft sobs of joy, their tiny faces buried in the fur that had saved their lives. Sarah stood nearby, one hand pressed over her mouth as tears welled again. But this time, they weren't born of fear, only relief. Jake looked at the banner overhead, the winter sun glinting against the words Lila and Maya's light, and felt the ache inside him shift into something quieter, steadier, and stronger. For the first time in years, he believed in beginnings again. Sometimes, miracles don't come as thunder or lightning. Sometimes, they come quietly, in the form of a brave soldier, a loyal dog, and the small beating hearts of two little girls who refuse to give up hope. In this cold and broken world, we are reminded, God never leaves us. Even when the nights feel endless and the storms too heavy, He sends people, ordinary people, to shine His light into the darkest corners. Every rescued child, every tear wiped away, is proof that faith and love still move mountains. So, tonight, take a moment. Hold your loved ones a little closer. Whisper a prayer for every child still waiting for their miracle. And believe, because sometimes God works through us to deliver hope. If this story touched your heart, please share it to spread awareness. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel, so together we can continue shining light into the shadows. May God bless you and your family, and may He protect every little soul still searching for safety and for love.